Michelle, thank you for joining me this morning.
Hi, Rebecca. Thank you so much for having me in this space talking about financial well-being and happiness. It's great to be here.
Absolutely. I'm so excited to be here to talk to you about this topic. This month we had, World Happiness Day. So there has been a bit of a theme on social media through our client base, and I'm sure with yours too, about happiness, employee happiness, and then through our respective works, looking at this concept of financial well-being and the role that it plays. And I'm just so grateful to have you here. So I will get you to introduce yourself in just a second, but I want to welcome everyone to the webinar. And thank you for taking time out of your morning to join us for this conversation. My name is Rebecca Ma. I am the co-founder and managing director of Money Happy. Money Happy is a employee benefits partner specializing in providing professional financial coaching to your employees as part of your wellbeing program. And we believe that money is a tool and it can be used to improve your happiness. Michelle, would you take a few minutes and just introduce yourself and your business and company and what it is that you specialize in?
Absolutely. So my name is Michelle Falzon. I founded Positive Wellbeing Education. It is a business that primarily focuses on the work and research and the science of positive psychology and coaching psychology. Um, I guess in short, I was a high school teacher for 16 years before I decided to spread my wings and dive into my passions in life, and that is positive psychology and coaching psychology. So last year, I conducted my own research, exploring the impact self-efficacy and optimism have on post-traumatic growth, primarily in business owners coming out of COVID. So it was a post-pandemic body of work. And that has now extended and it's back open again. But I love what I do, and I work with individuals as well as organizations and businesses to help understand the strategies that can be implemented in very much sustainable ways to help promote and advocate, in essence, individual well-being and how that can filter through and have a really profound domino effect on an organization as a collective, and what that looks like for growth and flourishment and success.
Wonderful. So today we really want to unpack this concept of money and happiness and look at some of the research, and then layer into that our professional and personal experience to look at things. We've all got the old adage, money doesn't buy you happiness. And I posted the other day, I saw at my local coffee shop a sign that said, money doesn't buy you happiness, but it buys you coffee. And that's pretty much the same thing.
Yeah.
And so it kind of speaks to some of where we might go and explore with the relationship today between money and happiness. But I think the best place for us to start with unpacking this idea is to first talk and sort of try to define or look at the research around the science of happiness. So that really is your domain area of expertise, Michelle, with your background and your qualifications in positive psychology. So can you just kick us off by talking to us about this concept of the science of happiness, what it means, and what is the science of happiness?
It's such a beautiful question, one that I love being asked to answer. And it stems back, it goes right back 2,000 years to Aristotle, essentially. Not that we're going to make this a history lesson by any sense of the term, but Aristotle and his approach to exploring happiness and well-being, over 2,000 years ago, essentially came up with two definitions that we now use within the realms of positive psychology to help us understand happiness and objective and subjective well-being. And so those two terms are hedonia and eudaimonia. When we look at concepts regarding objective well-being and subjective well-being, it's important to recognize that neither one is more important than the other per se. Rather, it's about how we choose to perceive each pathway of happiness and our contribution to obtaining and beyond just obtaining, but also sustaining our levels of happiness that support our well-being and our well-being that supports our happiness. So it can sometimes become a little bit misconstrued in the sense that it's a little bit of a chicken and an egg scenario. But nevertheless, it's important to have a very open mind towards what's serving you well. And as a positive psychologist, that I work in the space of what's working well, what's supporting people in really holding on to and being very much aware of what is serving you well in your life. So, you know, from relationships to our diet to our connection to spirituality, our careers, the meaning of life. And in all of that, it's also important to recognize our connection and relationship to our finances. So, even though we may have the best job in the world, we're doing something we're incredibly passionate about, it is our calling, but it is not giving us that return on investment or that financial security that it's supporting the happiness that the passion brings us. And on the contrary, sometimes we're getting this wonderful income, well above the threshold of a normal sort of salary pay, but we're just not feeling the zest and the joy that comes from going to work each day.
Yeah. I think it's really interesting when I first started to explore myself, this concept of happiness through the lens of financial well-being. Um, I came across this term, science of happiness, and how you've just explained it is that whilst there are, research components to it, which lend itself to that scientific description, the science, it really still, to me, everything you just said says to me that it's still a very personal, subjective paradigm, right? I mean, is there, a prescriptive way to be happy?
I think we write our own prescriptions in life. And that's,
I love that.
I think it's very, anything and everything we say is quite subjective. As human beings, we talk very much from not judgment, but personal experience. And so I can say yet again, subjectively, that education runs through my veins. I stated I was an educator in the high school system for 16 years and I absolutely loved it. But I outgrew that space. I outgrew that career. And that was just through the natural and organic experiences and pathways that sometimes I chose to walk and sometimes unknowingly I was walking down just by, matter of fate. So the even though the science is very profound and it's powerful and empowering when we accept and acknowledge that it exists and data is being collected on a daily basis and there's research out there and all of that sort of stuff, how we choose to integrate that information, that data, how we choose to personalize it to best serve us in our unique and individual existence each and every day. I think that's really important. So going back to the whole prescription and prescriptive sort of approach, we need to acknowledge our own level of intelligence and awareness And within that, be able to identify it and hold true to our value of each platform or each stepping stone that we take towards what makes us happy. And yet again, what is serving us really well.
Mm, yeah, absolutely. And do you think that's why people struggle with this concept so much? Is because, it's a journey that you sort of have to go on. You have to create this level of awareness about what really does make you happy, or, we talk about writing your own prescription for happiness. But those are sort of really poignant, difficult sometimes questions to ask yourself, depending on what's going on in your life, and then getting the answer that, no, actually, maybe I'm not really happy with what's going on in whatever, area of my life. Um, do you think that's why? Do you think that goes to explain some of the difficulty we have with this concept of what makes us happy? It seems like a simple question to ask yourself, but it's complicated for people to work out and live out.
And it's complicated, Beck, because we live in such a high paced, high strung, quite overwhelming existence or society. If were having this conversation 50 years ago, where social media didn't exist, technology was not what it is now, or most of it didn't exist as it does now. Life 50 years ago was very simple,
Mm.
and albeit I was not around 50 years ago, nor were you, but based on the stories that we have, been exposed to and been involved in from parents and grandparents and just, you know, beautiful older people beyond our years of existence, we can formulate this picture in our mind of just how different life can be. In 50 years in the concept or space of time is extraordinarily short and
Mm.
small. So to think of the advances, both technological and otherwise, that have occurred over this time is quite profound. So we get lost in what I like to refer to as the beautiful chaos of life. Sometimes we do it consciously and sometimes we do it unconsciously. And when we are able to pull ourselves out of that beautiful chaotic flow, we start to feel who we are as an individual better. We start to recognize, what do I need, as opposed to what am I trying to keep up with.
Mm.
So if we were to refer this to a financial example, for example, it would be, if my next door neighbor is making $220,000 a year, but I, on the other hand, am making 130. If it is by choice to keep up with the metaphorical Joneses, but at a risk of burnout
Mm.
and emotional stress, relational stress, then you need to be able to take a step back from that choice and be able to think about, well, if my $130,000 a year serves me really well, then why am I comparing myself to others?
Mm.
And it's that concept of comparison and what's known as hedonic adaptation, where we start to really step away from focusing on what we need as opposed to what we want.
Mm.
And we're too focused on the I wants of life rather than really settle for the I need this, based on, you know, Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And when we look at the safety needs and the psychological needs and everything else, it's like, well, are my needs being met? As opposed to, are my wants being met? Because needs and wants are, vastly different.
Yeah.
So it's, yeah, it's a I don't know if that's actually answered your question,
No, no, it
but
has. It has. And I think this segues us into this next piece of the puzzle with this conversation, and that is looking at happiness through the lens of personal financial well-being. So you made a really good point just then, which I think I can elaborate on just a little bit more. And that is that, when we are comparing ourselves, that comes from this sort of underlying concept of financial success, that where everything about financial success is all, it's like a scorecard. We're always keeping score of where we are relative to other people. And from a financial well-being perspective, that can be very detrimental, as you just said. But I think what we need to understand is that financial well-being isn't just financial success, and it isn't just financial stress. It's actually looking at your objective level of wealth and resources, and how is that, as you said, serving your needs and wants, but not compared to anyone else, remembering that you're on your own journey and you have your own values and life to live out in accordance to them. But then also looking at your mental well-being and your mindset around money, and how you are defining wealth as well for yourself. Because I think, again, when we think about money and wealth, we only instinctively look at it in a scorecard kind of sense, or we look at a balance sheet and we say, what do I have now? What do I still owe? What am I earning? How much debt do I have compared to everyone else? We never really go above and beyond that and extend to what else do I define wealth by in my life? Is it having more free time and space? Is it having a role that allows me to check out at 5 o'clock on the dot and not have to work late into the evenings? Is it being working for myself and potentially earning less than I could if I was in, a high powered career, but I have the flexibility to volunteer at school swimming carnival or whatever it might be? So financial well-being has for a long time been thought of or tied to financial success, and in an objective sense, how much you make, how much you have, how many investments you have, how many houses you have, how many cars you have, and what we have learned through sort of developing a broader and deeper understanding of our individual mental health is that actually there's a really big part of mental health and well-being and money mindset that's tied to financial well-being too. And that segues us into that research that we sort of that exists, I guess, on this topic. And I'm really keen to hear your thoughts around that. So I might just unpack a few key points from those research reports and then make some pull out some highlights, and we can talk about those. But for everybody listening, so they can go and sort of look these up themselves, there are some very well referenced uh, studies on this concept of money and happiness. The two that are sort of most commonly referred to is one by Daniel Kahneman in 2010. It was a Princeton study, and that was where they found that life evaluation, so how one looks back on their life when assessed, at time periods, steadily rises with income, but emotional well-being, so how one feels day to day about their money and finances, rises with income, but not beyond $75,000 worth of income per year. Now, consequently, a decade later, so just more recently in 2020, there was another study that was done by the Wharton School of Business in Pennsylvania University by Killingsworth. It was a much bigger sample size. So the previous one was 1,000 people and looking at 450,000 individual pieces of research. This more recent one was 33,000 people, looking at 1.7 million pieces of research collected for that sample size. They actually found, and they used a different methodology, but they actually found that there was no cap or limit on income, like had been found and hypothesized in the previous study, and that it's emotional well-being and life evaluation increased with income over time. So I think, rather than going into the nuts and bolts of the differences in the studies and why that is, I think there are just some key issues to pull out, which is probably consistent across both studies, but that show us where this link between money and happiness exists specifically. And that is that by improving well-being and therefore improving your financial resources, people have a greater sense of control and choice over how they spend their money and what they do. And therefore, that leads to a sense of increased happiness. And there was a question in these studies that said, to what extent do you feel in control of your life? Um, and the answer to that question accounted for 74% of the positive association between income and happiness. So it goes to show that, that connection between control and control over life, and control over finances, and control over destiny ultimately is one of the strongest correlations between this money and happiness piece. And then this is something that I think you would be very interested in. I'd love for you to comment on. It also evidenced that the association between income and experienced well-being was systematically larger for some and smaller for others. And the indicator was how people agreed with or answered the question, to what extent is money important to you? So that question was only moderately related to income, but it was a big indicator of how happy someone was about their financial well-being. So let's talk about how you see that from your professional experience. How people think and feel about money is evidenced as being a big predicator for positive or negative happiness around money.
Mm. It's an interesting topic of discussion because it makes me think about people's grassroots, for lack of a better term. So what people are exposed to in their childhood. So that has a massive impact on how we connect, relate, and view money as an adult when we start to receive that form of income on our own accord, right? I don't have the specific evidence-based answer to give to this particular point of discussion. I haven't conducted the research myself, but very much like you, Beck, have done the readings around the existing research that's been conducted by other incredible people in this field. And I think, in my personal and professional opinion, it all stems from our experiences and also how we choose to connect to finances, but as well as our well-being. So if we know how to look after ourselves, if we know how to holistically nurture our existence that supports our mental health, our emotional health, our spiritual health in very much sustainable ways, then those self-fulfilling needs in Maslow's hierarchy that I'll refer to for this point of the conversation are met, but we're also meeting all of those psychological needs as well, not through dependency on an external person or situation or environment, Rather, it's about us looking after ourselves.
Mm,
Now, obviously, finances paves the way, or money paves the way in order to have some of those needs met as well
mm,
by making sure we can pay our bills, making sure that we can put food on the table every night, pay for school fees, or, even just other physical health needs, an osteopath, a naturopath, you might need surgery, whatever the case is. We all need money to survive. But when we're able to draw a line in the sand and be able to differentiate what are our needs and what are the finances that we need to be able to support the needs in our life, as opposed to, well, this is what I want. I would love to be sitting in a hut over the ocean in the Maldives right now. But it's something that I can absolutely 100% and unequivocally identify as a want, as opposed to that I need that in
mm,
order for a survival purpose. Then we don't become so attached to it in an unhealthy manner.
mm,
I think it's always important to recognize that what we want in that line of the sand are goals to work towards.
mm,
And goals are wonderful things because it's part of development and evolution and growth in our life, both personally and professionally. It gives us something to aim toward.
mm,
Um, but I think, realistically speaking, providing that our needs are being met, and that is through a financial substance, through those finances being able to support those needs being met, then our stress levels are very much decreased. And when we can decrease those stress levels and live more productively, more wholesome, with greater clarity, um, the impact that we have on a day to day basis in terms of just showing up and being the best version of ourselves is remarkably more powerful.
mm,
And we have that sense of control. So if I'm that $130,000 person, knowing deep down that my wage gives me the flexibility and calmness to live comfortably. Anything beyond that is a bonus.
mm,
And how I choose to integrate myself into that bonus is entirely up to my own discretion. Whether I choose to save it for a rainy day, whether I choose to go on a shopping spree, whether I choose to donate that to um, a volunteer service of my choice, whatever I choose to do with that additional income is going to benefit my well-being anyway.
mm. Yeah. And I think this is where having an understanding the uh of what your needs are is really important too, because I by default we're typically good at looking at what our needs are in the present because we know them to be what we're experiencing or needing or lacking right now. I think sometimes where people get into uh, trouble or there's a certain level of anxiety that still remains is attached to future needs as well. This speaking specifically from a financial well-being context. People worry about will they be able to retire comfortably because they don't know how to quantify that or look at quantifying that or even what that really means to them in a lot of cases. So having this, I guess, this is where financial education and building knowledge and capabilities or skills that allow people to not only plan their immediate financial needs, but also to look at their medium term and long term financial needs. That then gives them the ability to use that same criteria that you just walked through in looking at what are they what trade-offs are they making in the present and why is that acceptable to them based on how they want to live? but they can use that same framework and make that same argument for themselves for their medium term and future selves as well, so that they're not the choices that they're making in the present, they're not discounted or taken away by any anxiety about not knowing how that's influencing their future as well.
Mm,
So I think that that's also an important point. The other thing that came up that was quite that stood out to me in that research was there was a question that was asked of the respondents around their qualitative um, reflection on their financial well-being. And it was, to what extent do you think money is indicative of success in life? And what the answers to that showed is that the more people equated that um, success, is indicative of, money is indicative of success, the more they equated that relationship, the less happy that they were, or the more it impacted their emotional well-being. So
mm,
I think that supports what you were saying before, and that, you know, we have to sort of see what meaning we're attaching to it in our lives, and make sure that it's working for us or not overall.
absolutely.
Yeah. So now I wanted to segue into really sort of looking at positive psychology in the context of financial well-being, because I think it's such an integral part of not only understanding some of your financial mindset and examining your financial mindset, but also in building a toolkit, if you like, for resilience and happiness, I would say, even with your finances throughout life. So, can you just define for us what is positive psychology?
Positive psychology is the science of well-being and happiness. It's the science of happiness. It explores the true meanings of life ultimately, and what, as opposed to standard clinical psychology, where for many, many, many years, the research in the space of psychology focused on the deficit.
Mm,
Positive psychology focuses on the opposite. And we work in conjunction with identifying the what works well in people's lives, or the life of an organization. When we focus our awareness on the negative, we only amplify the strength of those challenges.
mm,
And albeit, even when there is a negative or a challenge that exists, there are still things that have served a person or a business or an organization well to get to that point. We just sit in the negative bias of our human brain really, really well. And we struggle to be able to, I guess, identify or metaphorically shift the spotlight from the challenge to the growth. And so, the work of and practices of positive psychology l- significantly utilize these areas of understanding and these areas of knowledge. Um, it doesn't take, interestingly enough, it doesn't take a lot of work to shift people's perspective around this realm of work. And I truly believe it's because they get the feelings.
mm,
It's the vibe. When we move that spotlight and we're sitting in the negatives, the pessimistic, the I can't, I won't. It's a low vibrational space of perhaps even apathy,
mm,
if it's been extensive. And we just move that spotlight to a different direction and we highlight, but this is how you've gotten your success. And even if it has diminished ever so slightly, even if there have been impacts and things aren't traveling so smoothly, you have still come this far. So, what brought you to this space? And the moment you shift the dialogue is the moment you start to think differently and then you start to feel differently. And before too long, those positive feelings and emotions on a chemical level within our physical bodies become addictives. You
Mm,
know, we get that instead of a brief dopamine kick, when you do that for long periods of time, it becomes sustainable.
mm,
And the dopamine kick is not just momentary, it is on a daily basis because the way we've been able to psychologically change has shifted.
mm,
So, positive psychology has this incredibly beautiful, um, it is an ecosystem of knowledge and strength and solution focused approaches as well to being able to identify who are you, why am I here, why do I do what I do, you know, really understanding your why behind your actions, your motives, your values, your choices,
yeah.
and then moving beyond your why to understanding the purpose of it all.
Mm. I think there's so many correlations or integrations to financial well-being with positive psychology. I think one of them is in terms of, as I said earlier, how you might help move or shift someone's perspective or mindset from, say, circumstances where they're in what we would call a mental hot state about money. And maybe that's following a financial crisis or um, an externalized event that's, created this major financial event for them. But also in just how we think about or how people think about financial well-being as well. So, you know, once upon a time, it used to be financial well-being was only necessary or associated with people who were in desperate, financial distress. And so, whereas now, I think just like with mental health, there's more of an understanding or an appreciation that no, in fact, it's actually a continuum. I mean, how it's a state of well-being that is in flux and flexes with or in response to what's going on in the world, what's going on in my life, what's going on in me at any one time. And it can be and is often completely separate or disassociated from a one-page snapshot of, your assets and liabilities or your income and expenses. You can have people who own their own home and are earning, high six figures, and they're in a financial crisis, from a well-being perspective. And that might be they just there was a flood that took out their house, and now they've got to go through this whole period of rebuilding. Or they might be in the middle of a relationship breakdown. And so there's insecurity around finances as a result of that, of course, in other areas of life too. But I think the antidote to dealing with those crises and troubles, yes, of course, sometimes a percentage of getting on track or getting yourself out of those situations and circumstances and moving back into a positive state of financial well-being or a flourishing state of financial well-being is looking at maybe what needs to be done from an income and expenses and restructuring perspective or an insurance perspective. But there's also a lot of work that needs to be done. And that is where I see positive psychology playing a role too. So what do you think about, when there's sort of two places of where someone comes from when they're struggling with core financial well-being, right? And this is separate from value and what they already know, but someone who's actually in a scarcity kind of situation. They're scarce resources, they're not meeting expenses, they're struggling with repayments. So there is a level of financial distress there. Um, how does how can we use positive psychology to assist that person from a financial, in dealing with their financial issues and distress?
I personally would first ask them, what are their absolute needs in life? What do you need to have your basic needs met? So, basic needs would be those physiological needs, your bills, your food, your warmth, your rest. That would be my first
Yeah.
pathway of highlighting an awareness. It would also include security needs, the safety needs, and then moving into the psychological needs. So once you can, and those physiological, those safety needs, they are more often than not tangible.
Mm.
So we're dealing with something that can be seen, felt, all of the above, picked up, identified with. When we start looking at the psychological needs, we start thinking about, the space of accomplishment. What do you feel like you need to obtain in order to have that sense of, I've got this, I can do this, I will do this, I have done this.
Mm.
So we really start to shift into the internal environment rather than the external environment. If we're able to recognize these areas in bite-sized chunks, we ultimately don't overwhelm an individual. We just take it in a very calm, rational, strategic process through a solution-focused approach where we explore your needs as an individual, right? And it's through no judgment. There is no expectation. It's about just openly acknowledging and taking into account as a person in this world on this particular day and moving forward into the next 3 months. This is what I need. And then we also start to potentially bite size and chunk down into um, being a little bit more creative. Now, the creative space can lend more into the I want, but creative can also be an I need. And I think it's important to recognize that, you know, the creative space or that self actualization realm of humanistic psychology serves us to live a fulfilling life. And fulfilling life is still a need. That comes down to the meaning and the purpose of why we get up each day. What is it that is driving us? What are our motivators? If you remove the drivers, if you remove the motivators from your existence, then you diminish your purpose and your why becomes non-existent. So it's reverse engineered. So if I was to start off with somebody having a conversation who is in dire straits, as you've hypothesized, that is where I would start right from the very beginning, but not look back in the rearview mirror to identify, well, this is what's gone wrong. And now we're going to sit in all our misery and sorrow. It's like, okay, well, this has happened. This is our story. We are where we are right now, but we're going to look forward because just like in real life, you don't drive a car 100% of your time looking in your rear vision mirror.
Mm.
You do that, you're going to end up in a ditch.
Mm.
You've got to be able to recognize that what has happened is real. It's yours. You've got to take ownership and be accountable of it, particularly if, the mistakes have been proven. It's like, well, let's take those mistakes and turn them into lessons. And what are the lessons in those challenges that we're able to now take in the present moment as we look forward, driving our car, knowing the direction that we're going to head in? And along the way in that journey, you'll come across the signposts. And those signposts are, this is what I need.
Mm.
And we
And
meet them at the physiological, the psychological level and beyond.
That's so important. And see, that's like pulling, that's positive psychology right there. So then you say, well, okay, financial well-being. There's so much stigma around financial well-being. And a lot of the stigma is because of how people attach meaning to the scorecard. You know, we sort of see uh, personal success as a result of being smart, being intelligent, being good with money, doing, making good choices. And we see personal financial failing as a result of our failing, and as you just pointed out, there are times when maybe that is the case. It's a bad decision, a spontaneous thing, an error of judgment. But there are also a lot of instances where it's completely beyond your control as well, and it's actually, we've had a global pandemic or interest rates rose on you straight out of the gate or, whatever it might be. You've had a divorce, someone left you, they cheated on you or something, and then you've been left in a very precarious financial situation. So there is, there is, it's the meaning, if we are just to say and sit with that feeling of where I am is my fault and I'm a bad person and I should have known better and it's all my, it's all me, then that's not good, right? I mean, that's not, um, I think you, as you said, like with anything, we've got to take a little bit, we've got to take responsibility for where we are and whatever the decisions or uh, whatever responsibility we had in the outcome. But we, as you've said, if we can attach the the importance of moving forward to looking into the future and reframing how we're going to see what's happened in the past as well, then that's beneficial too. I mean, one of the things I learned um, early on in life and someone being part of this on me was that, we actually have complete control, right, over how we attach meaning to anything. Um,
Absolutely.
so, I mean, whether it's in business, whether it's in the schoolyard, with kids and what they say, um, we have the capacity to actually choose in a way how we feel about something that was said or done or that happened. Um, and I think that's kind of the crux of positive psychology as well and the
Mm.
interplay, right? You don't have to feel a certain way about something. It's good to feel the honest and raw emotion about it, but then
Yes,
you need to then take positive action on how you move forward with that.
exactly. And that comes down to one's ability of self-awareness. And self-awareness for a lot of people is a legitimate struggle. You know, that they really are very much challenged with solitude and reflection and sitting in sometimes the challenges that have existed and the mistakes that have been made and more often than not, if we don't come to that realization that self-awareness is pivotal and vital in our growth and development, if we're not able to consciously acknowledge what change needs to occur, then the change will never occur. So we are our own homing ground. It always comes back to us because we are one with everything in this world. We are one with our finances. We are one with our materialistic possessions until we feel the time has come that we've outgrown something. We are one with our love and our happiness. We are one with everything,
Yeah.
and being one doesn't mean you have to be attached for the whole existence of your life, but you are one with it until you are ready to level up and tap into, your potential, to tap into the unfamiliar and experience growth and what that looks like. There is so much to our ability to accept and acknowledge. But once we do, it's a game changer.
Yeah. Now I'm going to ask you a hard question, and that's a juicy one because
Okay. Let me settle into this.
real questions that people want to know the answers to, or at least have a framework put forward by to think through. So, what about we've dealt with people who are in financial distress and some of the ways that we can address and help that person work through that and into a place of better, improved financial well-being. But a lot of the time, and this is through my professional experience as well, people aren't aren't necessarily struggling financially speaking. They've got good income, strong income, and great earning potential, and they may have a solid asset base and not a lot of debt potentially. But let's just remove those sort of parameters even and just say someone who's not in distress but is doing well from a financial well-being perspective, but feeling unhappy about their finances. Someone who's not happy with what they earn or where they live, or just they feel as though they're lacking or should be doing better, for whatever reason. What would you say, what would be the role of positive psychology, or what could we pull from positive psychology to sort of take to that person and say, let's have a think through this? What would you say?
My first question to that hypothetical person would simply be, what do you have in your life thus far that makes you happy, has made you happy, that your money has actually given you?
Mm,
And get them to move away from, again, I want the holiday to the Maldives. I want to be sitting in a, white and blue condo in the Greek islands. I want the newest Porsche. That's beautiful. And I'm not here to take that away from you, but you have so much already. And if you can shift your awareness into two spaces, materialistic and everything else, what do you have in your life right now that you're actually grateful for? The engaging of gratitude on a psychological level brings so much power to it that it will literally. I'm going to digress just for 1 second, because I was at an incredible conference yesterday here in Melbourne. And some of the science or some of the research that's stemming from the science of positive psychology is incredible. And some of that research that was shared with the audience members yesterday highlighted that individuals who practice gratitude 3 times a day over just 4 days showed a significant shift in their brainwave activity.
mm,
That for me was like electricity in my body. I was so excited
yeah.
because we often associate gratitude with whimsical, airy fairy, like, you know, unicorns and sparkles. And it's like, no,
Mm,
it's actually really powerful. And if we've all got access to the research.
yeah.
We just need to be tuned into wanting to enhance our knowledge and awareness around what we can control, as opposed to sitting in the poor me little rowboat and letting everybody else do the hard work for us. Right. And I
Yeah.
say that with love and
No,
respect.
love that. I think that
But
it's what you'd say to, it's what you'd say to your kids, if they were in that state, you'd be like, hang on, let's think about all the kids in the world that don't have an iPad,
that's exactly right. And all we've done is lost the charger and it's here somewhere, but it's flat for the next 4 hours. But the reality of gratitude having such a profound, empowering impact on our ability to think, feel, be, and then do is remarkable. You know, so 3 times a day over 4 days, and you're creating new neural synaptic connections in your brain that allows you to see things differently. And if you can see it differently, you're thinking differently. And then the domino effect starts to occur on the inside, on our internal environment, which then is reflected into our external environment. You know, and that would be as a coach, I would hold somebody accountable for that practice
Yeah.
and advise them for
Yeah.
the next. I would, you know, maybe push it out a little bit and say for the next 7 days, 3 times a day, I want you to write down as many things as you can that you are grateful for. And in conjunction with that, also journal. How are you feeling at each particular point in time? So there is not so much a quantitative approach to obtaining this, you know, personal data. It's more obviously qualitative, but you're able to highlight the journey of emotional growth that you're obtaining from this accountability task too. So you're really killing two birds with one stone in using two positive psychology interventions
Mm.
just in the one practice, gratitude and journaling. And the amount of times I've had somebody that I work with turn around and go, I don't journal. And they sort of become a
Nobody,
little bit
nobody does
dismissive,
what you need to.
you
Yeah.
know, and journaling has that 16 or 13-year-old girl connotation to it. It's like, just again, remove the negativity from it.
Yeah.
You're not the 13-year-old girl. You're a 45-year-old CEO of a massive business. This is
Yeah.
something you can control. So, what's your definition of success?
Mm.
How do you want to feel success? Because if that's what you want to feel, you need to identify what you can control.
Mm.
And so it all comes back to accountability.
Yeah, that's great. And you know, I think, and you mentioned this before, the internal and the external environment, that's such key, like integral stuff to moving the dial for someone on an internal environment. I think too, probably the external and looking at their external environment and saying, how many times do you look at Instagram a day? Or how many times, what are you thinking about? Like when you're making decisions about where to go on holiday or what you're going to do this weekend, or, are you actually, how often how will this look on my social media profiles, or how will this, how will it sound when I tell my friends about this? Um, how big of an influence is that really having on your decision making? And that's a huge piece of financial well-being as well, because, we end up making decisions or being heavily influenced about what kind of car we drive or where we might live and what holidays we go on or what restaurants we eat at, just to be able to show and perform for the people that we know. And that practice, daily, weekly, monthly, has a huge impact in the reverse or the opposite to what practicing gratitude would, because, practicing gratitude your research that you were aware of yesterday has demonstrated that you're rewiring your brain for the better by doing that. But if, if you're driven by status and showing off really, to your friends or performing for people in a social setting, and if that's how you're benchmarking and equating success and progress financially, then, the practice of constantly posting and seeking the validation from others and that comparisonitis is got to be doing the opposite. No evidence base for that that I can quote,
Yeah.
but it's got to be taking it's got to be rewiring your brain in a way that's not helping with the overall goal, which is to get to a place of personal happiness, with finance.
Absolutely. Yeah, and it is. It goes back to what we were saying before about the quick fix of dopamine hits. It's almost like what we get out of indulging in a piece of chocolate or a jam donut. Like, it makes us feel good whilst we're salivating over it, and we can feel that sugary goodness in our mouth. But then moments later, you kind of go, probably shouldn't have done that. Or, I often, we don't do sort of fish and chip nights. Like, some families do Friday night fish and chips and things like that. Every now and then I'll go, God, I've got a hankering for like really good fish and chips or a dirty kebab or something like that. And it's in that moment, and you just know that I'm going to regret this. But the goodness takes over, and you get that rush of, yeah, this is so good, tastes so good. But then later on, you feel like you need to run a marathon because you're so bloated and you feel greasy and all of the above. In a similar fashion, social media does the same thing. Comparison does the same thing. Your next door neighbor gets the newest Porsche, you've got to get the next one up. Until 4 weeks later, it's the new Porsche is not the new Porsche anymore. It's just the old Porsche.
Yeah.
So we got to look at superficial happiness or superficial hits that help us feel happy, as opposed to underlying strong current, constant, sustainable practices. And this is where the power of positive psychology interventions really are powerful. Meditation, mindfulness, savoring, the appreciation of beauty. Like, there are so many interventions that can be implemented, applied, developed over time, and it all comes from this recognition of, what change do I want to be in order to create? And as a coach, there are many coaching models out there to support people's pathways of identification in this space. But I'm quite fond of the growth model, where it looks at goals, reality, options, will, tactics. And then the last one, which is my most favorite, is your habits. Because if you can't identify what are your bad habits, non-judgmentally, we all have them, you will never be able to relinquish them, set them free, and make space for new habits to come in that will help you take the steps into the direction that you want.
And we know that to be so true about improving financial well-being too. I mean, at the end of the day, give 10 people the exact same investment advice and it'll make someone rich and someone will go backwards. So, and it all comes down to the habits that underpin or underlie that person's day-to-day routine with money, how they feel and think and therefore behave with it. So again, just another way that this positive psychology concept is so integrated to supporting personal financial well-being is in the pursuit of behavior change at a personal level. So that's really key as well. I think we might just work towards finishing with some suggestions for business, around positive psychology and financial well-being. So at an we've looked at some individual suggestions, and I think we've covered that and given some great tips for people who might be looking to explore some positive psychology in the context of their financial well-being. But from an organizational perspective, you know, what are your thoughts about some of the ways that this is relevant in the context of a workplace, and B, that, from a solutions perspective, how can they look to incorporate or include some solutions that support their people?
From an organizational standpoint, there is an area of work by a man who's spent an enormous amount of time in this field, an incredible man, and his name is David Cooper Ryder. And excuse me, his area of research and creation leads into what he's now known for as an appreciative inquiry approach. My personal experience in this space has proven to show great rewards for individuals in the organization and then the organization as a whole. I would like to sidecut for a second and just really preface all of this by saying an organization or a business only exists if the people in it exist.
Mhm.
And the people exist if they know who they are within themselves and what they have to offer and bring each day, how they show up. So, an appreciative inquiry approach to supporting organizations thrive, flourish, and succeed look at primarily 4 areas. It's called the 4D model. They've only just expanded this and reference it now as a 5D model. But ultimately, it looks at breaking down the structure of an organization right down to its core. So it looks at um, definition and clarity of an organization. Ultimately, why do you exist? Right? It starts to then look at the discovery of new things within this organization from a very much a deep appreciation for a purpose driven organization. Then you can start to shift in, well, let's create this dream. Like, what do we actually want to move into? 20 years from now, we're so determined to make this business work. We're so determined to succeed on various levels based on our definition of success and our why and our purpose. Where are we going? So there's this dream phase. And then we start to design it. Like, well, dreaming is one thing. That just makes it feel good. But how do we actually bring this to fruition? And we start to design this cultural shift in order for it to come to life. And then there's a destiny or a delivery phase as well. So over a 12-month journey of incorporating positive psychology, coaching psychology, and the work of appreciative inquiry approaches, along with being solution focused and all of the above, strength focused as well, it becomes very wholesome and collegial. And there is this holistic approach to really growing a business,
Mm.
and you're not growing it from the outside in, but you're growing it from the inside out. Just like any living organism, if you don't nourish it and nurture it from the roots, it's not going to grow.
Mm.
So there has to be this, you've got to be a homing pigeon. You've got to come home to know how to spread your wings and fly the coop and which
Mm.
direction you want to head in.
Yeah, I think that's so important because we, what I've noticed is that, and this is sort of evolves over time, but when we look at things like burnout, we might be saying, oh, well, how can we make a job more efficient? Or how can we skill that person up more so that they're able to do their job better or faster or more efficiently? Or how can we, I think a lot of the time, and we do a lot of work in the early career space as well. And the focus has always been on more skills training for that individual so that they're just really, they have all the skills. They might need more technical specification training, or they might need more training on how to use Excel, or they might need more training on how to use this. And then that will support any poor performance in, say, productivity, retention, and those kinds of things. But really, at some point, a person knows what they need to know to do their job, and performance or underperformance is really a symptom of something internally, right? Lack of purpose, feeling unfulfilled, a lack of motivation. It could be a cultural issue, which could also then flow back into people feeling like they're not, um, you know, belonging to the organization. So it really, in my understanding, comes back nowadays mostly to how people are feeling, or not
Mm,
feeling specifically, or what they're challenged by in their own personal lives, whether that's mental well-being, financial well-being, physical well-being, and then really supporting their mind, their attitude, their behaviors, and their well-being across those three areas: financial, mental, and physical, is sort of the missing link, or the activation that's needed to help, as you say, that person, and then that team, and then that business unit, and then that organization
mm,
really be able to reach collectively its goals. So someone said the other day, if you take care of the person, the KPIs will take care of themselves. So instead of just focusing
absolutely.
on their KPIs, and saying, well, you're not making enough calls, or you're not selling enough um, cars, or, you're not, your drawings aren't, up to speed. I mean, we need to say, that person's really qualified, and typically they are nowadays.
Mm,
They've got experience, they're qualified, they're on good incomes. So where's the missing link here? It's the
mm,
individual. And looking at from a solutions perspective, then, um, my personal opinion, and this is what I say to companies, is that there are lots of solutions. Some are very bespoke, some are very scalable, some are very tech-based, some are very hands-on, high touch. And ultimately, it's going to come down to the business itself, its size, its culture, its preferences, how its people learn, and, where they're based and how they want to engage with solutions. But also, I think critically, it's important for businesses to understand why they're solving this problem, so that they can then look for solutions that are a good fit, or values aligned, with them as a business, because it really is a partnership working together with an organization. Um, yes, we're delivering businesses a solution for their employees, and so there is an end user relationship, but
mm.
there's also a partnership with the organization ultimately too. So from a delivery perspective, from a engagement and participation perspective, and then also to really hopefully embed the solution in the business's culture enough that it actually has some chance of creating change for the better.
Exactly. And just to highlight what you've said, and to end the conversation, I suppose, Beck, Michael Bunting and a colleague published an incredible book. It's called Vertical Growth, and it's what you've just said, is very much what this book is about. It explores and explains how self awareness transforms leaders and organizations via this approach of recognizing that we exist on an axis.
Mm.
You know, vertical growth is about being able to look down and into yourself as a unique individual, a human, um, identifying the shifts, the transformations that occur from within, as opposed to the horizontal growth, which is very much our skills and capabilities. They're all necessary. They're all important. We need to have those capabilities and skill sets in order to meet targets, get those KPIs, and so on and so forth. But once we know how to do something, that growth essentially stops because you know it. You know how to use Excel, you become proficient over it. It may take you 6 months or 12 months to know the ins and outs and the nitty gritties and become a master in that platform. Once you're there, you're there. And then you've got to go, well, what's next?
Mm.
And most job roles are quite boxed, whereas personal growth and evolution is there's no stopping, it's exponential.
Yeah.
Um, and that within itself is, as you've said, will support the continual sustainable growth of a business in very healthy, productive, positive ways.
And where those solutions exist within a business that help people do that, that's going to help people want to, stay and feel like they're on a journey with the business in some senses. If they can continue to improve themselves and continue to see value and purpose in what they do, and it's a symbiotic relationship, then, that's a relationship, a working relationship that's going to continue more and for longer than say one where that just doesn't exist. And as you say, after someone's sort of let his job, what's next for me? I'm going to go and do something else.
Exactly.
Yeah. Thank you so much for your time, Michelle.
It has been my pleasure. Thank you so much, Rebecca. It's been a real privilege having this conversation with you today.
Likewise. Thank you, everyone, for joining us.